December 7th, 1941. It was a Sunday. In the great cities of America, the morning unfolded with its usual rhythm. People were reading the Sunday comics, heading to church, or perhaps planning an afternoon drive. Then, the news began to ripple outwards, a crackle over the radio that would stop the nation in its tracks. Pearl Harbor had been attacked. The words themselves, attacked, war, Japan, felt unreal, like a radio play, not a news bulletin. In cities like New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, the reaction was immediate and profound. The vast, comforting oceans that had separated America from the conflicts in Europe and Asia suddenly felt like open, undefended pathways. The psychological impact was a physical jolt. In Los Angeles, the proximity to the Pacific made the threat feel immediate. Rumors swirled of Japanese fleets massing off the coast. In New York, the towering skyline, a proud symbol of American ingenuity, now looked like a terrifyingly perfect target for bombers. The day after the attack, the cities changed. Long lines formed instantly at military recruitment offices, wrapping around city blocks. Military patrols, with steel helmets and bayonets, began to appear at key infrastructure points, bridges, reservoirs, and power stations. The war wasn't a distant event anymore. It was here, on their streets. This initial shock quickly coalesced into a flurry of activity. The government, fearing a fifth column of spies and saboteurs, acted with a swiftness that was both decisive and, in retrospect, tragic. This fear would soon lead to one of the nation's darkest chapters, the executive order that would force over 100,000 Japanese Americans, most of them citizens, from their homes in coastal cities into internment camps. For the general populace, the shock galvanized into a nervous, angry resolve. The day-to-day routines of peacetime were over, instantly obsolete. They were replaced by a new, urgent question that echoed in every apartment building and on every street corner. What can I do? The city was no longer just a place to live and work. It was a fortress that needed to be defended, a factory that needed to be armed, and every single citizen, from the mayor to the shoeshine boy, was about to be drafted into its defense. The most dramatic and disorienting change to the American city was the blackout. This was not a polite request. It was a rigidly enforced military order. The logic was stark and simple. A city glittering with lights was a beautifully illuminated target for an enemy bomber. To survive, the city had to vanish. Imagine the iconic Manhattan skyline, a global symbol of light and energy, reduced to a jagged black silhouette against the night sky. Imagine the sprawling, neon-drenched boulevards of Los Angeles, dark from the hills to the sea. This was the new, nightly reality. The effort to erase the city's light was total. Heavy, opaque curtains, often just blankets or black-painted cardboard, became the most important items in every home. Store window displays, which had celebrated the abundance of American life, were now dark, cavernous, and empty. Families would huddle in their darkened living rooms. The simple act of reading a book or playing cards meant gathering around a single, heavily shrouded lamp in one designated blackout room. Any sliver of light that escaped was a public offense, a potential betrayal of the entire city's safety. On the streets, the transformation was surreal. Streetlights were extinguished or fitted with tiny pinprick hoods that cast a dim, ghostly circle on the pavement. Cars were mandated to have blackout driving lights, special covers that reduced their headlights to two faint, horizontal slits of blue or red. Navigating the city became a challenge of memory and touch. People stumbled on curbs, bumped into strangers, and felt a new, primal fear of the urban darkness. The familiar, energetic pulse of the city at night was replaced by a hushed, anxious silence, broken only by the footsteps of a patrolling warden. This manufactured darkness was a profound psychological weapon. It was a constant, oppressive, and nightly reminder. It told every citizen, in the most visceral way possible, that the war was not a distant abstraction. The war was here, tonight, just outside their darkened window. The darkness of the blackout was the passive defense. The air raid drill was the active, terrifying preparation for the moment it failed. While a sustained bombing campaign never reached the U.S. mainland, the fear of one was a powerful, all-consuming engine of public life. The sound of the air raid siren became a new, dreaded part of the urban symphony. Cities established complex warning systems. A yellow alert might be a series of short blasts, signaling an enemy was possible. The red alert, a long rising and falling wail, meant an attack was imminent. At the sound of that wail, the city was expected to move with practiced mechanical precision. Traffic would screech to a halt, drivers and passengers abandoning their vehicles. Pedestrians would immediately clear the streets, running for the nearest designated public shelter, clearly marked with a shelter sign. These shelters were often subway stations, the basements of large office buildings, or reinforced school auditoriums. They were stark, concrete spaces, and families were encouraged to bring a small emergency kit with first aid supplies, a flashlight, and perhaps a book. In homes, the drill was just as precise. Families would extinguish all lights, turn off the gas at the main, and gather in the safest part of the house. This was typically a basement, an interior hallway, or under a heavy piece of furniture like a dining table, meant to protect from shattering glass and debris. Schools drilled with grim repetition. Children were taught to duck and cover under their desks. They were issued identification tags, much like soldiers, to be worn at all over their clothes. This small, morbid detail served a dual purpose: identification in a disaster, and a chilling reminder to children that they, too, were targets. These drills were not optional. They were organized, high-stress, and designed to burn procedure into muscle memory. The goal was to prevent panic, which authorities feared would be as deadly as any bomb. The drills, the sirens, the shelter signs, the ID tags, they were the rituals of a city bracing for a blow. They transformed millions of disconnected urbanites into a single, coordinated civilian defense force, all listening for the same dreadful sound. The defense of the American city did not fall to the Army and Navy alone. It fell to the citizens. Almost overnight, the Office of Civilian Defense mobilized a vast home front army. Its soldiers were the grocer, the bank teller, the high school teacher, and the retired couple from down the block. At the forefront of this new army was the air raid warden. Every city block, sometimes every apartment building, had one. These volunteers, men and women often too old or ineligible for military service, were given a helmet, an armband, a gas mask, and a whistle. They held real authority. During a blackout, they were the law. They patrolled their beat, meticulously scanning for any sliver of light. A sharp rap on the door or a shrill blast of their whistle would greet any violator. They were trained to be polite, but firm, reminding their neighbors that a light on your block could bomb my block. Alongside them, and just as vital, were the plane spotters. From rooftops, church steeples, and specially built wooden towers, thousands of volunteers scanned the skies, 24 hours a day, in grueling 2-hour shifts. This was the Ground Observer Corps. These men and women learned to identify enemy and friendly aircraft by their silhouettes and engine sounds, often from simple flashcards. Their reports were phoned in to filter centers, where the information was plotted on giant, map-covered tables by WACS members. This human-powered system was America's primary early warning network. It was a tedious, often freezing, and vital job. These spotters were the city's eyes, the first line of defense against a surprise attack. This mobilization was staggering. By mid-1942, over 10 million Americans had volunteered for some form of civilian defense duty. They trained in basic firefighting, emergency first aid, and even how to handle incendiary bombs. It was a demanding, unpaid, and crucial role that gave a sense of purpose to those who had to stay behind. The war couldn't be won with drills and blackouts alone. It required two other critical elements: money and morale. The American city became the stage for a relentless, overwhelming campaign of orchestrated patriotism, a powerful psychological tool for uniting the populace. The most visible sign was the war bond drive. These weren't quiet financial transactions. They were spectacular, high-pressure, star-studded campaigns. Cities hosted colossal bond rallies, shutting down major thoroughfares. Hollywood stars, radio personalities, and sports heroes toured the nation, their fame a potent weapon for the Treasury. A-list stars like Bette Davis, Hedy Lamarr, and Clark Gable would set up booths in Times Square or on Hollywood Boulevard, promising a kiss to anyone who purchased a high-value bond. Massive billboards equated buying bonds with directly killing the enemy. It was framed as a direct, personal blow against Hitler and Tojo. But this patriotic fervor went far beyond bonds. Propaganda posters were plastered on every available surface. Loose lips sink ships was a terrifying reminder in every bar and diner, making idle chatter feel like treason. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. Shamed single-occupant drivers. Hollywood studios went to war, churning out films that glorified American troops and viciously caricatured the enemy. Radio shows were interrupted for patriotic messages. Even popular music shifted, with songs like Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition becoming national hits. Children were a key target. They were organized into junior commandos and scrap battalions. They competed fiercely in school-wide drives to collect scrap metal, rubber, kitchen grease for explosives, and even tinfoil. It was a brilliant move, turning a child's desire to play into a vital part of the supply chain. This all-encompassing patriotism was incredibly effective. It raised billions of dollars and unified a diverse, often fractious, urban population into a single, motivated force. But it also created an intense, suffocating pressure to conform. Any sign of dissent or apathy was seen as deeply suspect, even dangerous. While blackouts and air raids were the fear of war, rationing was the daily, grinding, inescapable reality of it. The American war machine was an insatiable beast, devouring staggering amounts of rubber, metal, oil, and food. This meant the home front, the most prosperous society on earth, had to learn to live with less. In 1942, the government introduced the rationing system. Every man, woman, and child was issued a series of ration books filled with stamps. These books, Book 1, Book 2, and so on, were the key to survival. They were a new, parallel currency, and far more important than the dollar. Want to buy sugar? You needed a stamp. Meat? A stamp. Coffee, butter, cheese, canned goods, gasoline, tires, shoes, all were rationed. It didn't matter if you were a millionaire. If you ran out of red points for meat, you ate no meat until the next month. This system fundamentally re-engineered city life. The automobile, the very symbol of American freedom, was hobbled. The A sticker on a car's windshield was the most common, allotting a paltry 3 or 4 gallons of gas per week. This was just enough for essential errands. Public transportation, streetcars, buses, and subways, became jammed to capacity, filled with commuters who had been forced to leave their cars at home. Car-sharing clubs were promoted as a patriotic duty. Grocery shopping became a complex art. Housewives became home front generals, managing their family's allotment of points, learning to substitute, stretch, and make do. Meatless days were common. Recipes for victory cake, made without butter or sugar, were printed in every newspaper, and victory gardens bloomed in the most unlikely urban places. Public parks, like the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, were plowed up. Rooftops in Brooklyn, tiny backyards in Chicago, and apartment window boxes were all converted to grow vegetables, freeing up farm produce for the troops. This shared, unavoidable sacrifice was a powerful, unifying force. While a black market for stamps and gasoline inevitably emerged, most citizens abided by the rules. It was a visible, daily, and edible reminder that everyone was in this together. The wartime city wasn't just a place of defense and scarcity. It was also a place of furious, deafening, round-the-clock production. The cities were the arsenal of democracy, the roaring engines that would ultimately build the victory. Factories that had made refrigerators now churned out machine guns. Automobile plants in Detroit were converted, seemingly overnight, to produce an endless river of tanks, jeeps, and B-24 bombers. Shipyards in cities like Los Angeles, San Pedro, and New York, Brooklyn Navy Yard, operated 24/7, launching ships faster than the enemy could sink them. This industrial miracle was fueled by a new, revolutionary workforce. With 16 million Americans, mostly men, in uniform, the call went out for women to fill their jobs. Rosie the Riveter became a national icon, a symbol of the millions of women who traded their aprons for overalls. These Rosies streamed into factories. They learned to weld, to rivet, to wire complex electrical panels, and to operate massive industrial cranes. This was a profound, seismic social shift. It offered women unprecedented economic freedom and a powerful new sense of competence and independence. This boom also ignited one of the largest internal migrations in American history. Millions of people, particularly from the rural South, both black and white, poured into the industrial cities of the North, Midwest, and West Coast, all seeking high-paying defense jobs. This massive influx put an impossible strain on urban infrastructure. Housing was desperately scarce. People were forced to live in trailers, hotbed apartments, where one worker slept while another was on shift, or even converted chicken coops. Social tensions, simmering beneath the surface of patriotic unity, began to boil over. The 1943 Zoot Suit riots in Los Angeles saw clashes between white servicemen and young Mexican-American men. The same year, a brutal race riot erupted in Detroit over housing and jobs. The city was a churning, volatile, and exhausted place. It was louder, dirtier, more crowded, and more dangerous than ever before. But it was also the humming, unstoppable engine that was, piece by piece, winning the war. Life in the wartime American city was a life of profound and exhausting contradiction. It was a life defined by the daily fear of a siren's wail, yet also by an unprecedented sense of community and shared purpose. It was a time of frustrating, daily scarcity, yet also of booming industry and new, life-changing opportunities. The constant tension of the blackouts, the drills, the rationing, the long factory shifts created a unique psychological pressure. The city was a machine running at full blast, 24 hours a day, for nearly 4 years. It stretched its citizens to their limits. This pressure forged an incredible bond. People were united by a common enemy and a common goal in a way the nation had never experienced. Your neighbor wasn't just the person in the next apartment. They were your partner in the scrap drive, a fellow warden, someone who understood your ration book frustrations and shared your dread of the casualty lists. This camaraderie was a powerful antidote to the fear. It gave meaning to the endless sacrifices. But this unity had a price. It demanded conformity. The loose-lipped sink ship's paranoia created a suspicion of outsiders, of those who spoke with an accent, of those who complained, of any dissent. When the war finally ended, when VE Day, And then VJ Day erupted onto the streets in a delirious, explosive release of joy. It was a release of years of pent-up fear, grief, and bone-deep exhaustion. The lights came back on, all at once, illuminating a world that had been irrevocably changed. The cities themselves were transformed. New factories, new housing tracts, and new highways had been built. But the social change was even deeper. Women, having tasted economic independence, were hesitant to return to the kitchen. Black veterans, having fought for freedom abroad, returned ready to demand it at home. The men and women who lived through it would never see their cities the same way again. They had seen their glittering skylines vanish into darkness, and in that darkness they had found a new, complicated, and powerful sense of themselves.